Welcome, or welcome back. I started writing this script believing that I'll just make a really quick voiceover since there's nothing I could really add to this artwork other than a few thoughts. But then I started digging into the old file I used for this and I saw something I really wanted to show you. I often just tend to not care about atmosphere beforehand as much as I should because especially when you work digitally you have many options to create a piece of higher definition work by using essentially simple effects, but if you combine them together they can elevate your work to a next level. It's really easy to get hyper focused on characters or smaller details and neglect the bigger picture, which could be made much better through some clever additions. And I'm not talking about polishing a half decent image by just adding some effects and details, but actually creating an atmosphere that helps you tell your narrative. So listen to me now and I will show you at the end of this video how to turn this image into this one. Today, as I said, I mostly have a voiceover for you, but you see the whole showcase of the effect after that. I'm in the middle of trying to finish a picture that is complicated, and I'm planning something strange with that alongside just the artwork, but in the meantime, I don't have any fresh videos again, so let's change that. Today's video is about this Draw This in Your Style challenge piece I made back in March. A few days ago I sat down and I wrote a list about all the videos I want to complete in the near future, and I actually have a ton of footage I haven't turned into videos, and this is one of them. And one that is nothing special really, so I can just record a voiceover really quick. This work is based on a painting by MissDVR.art from Instagram. The original was pretty different image, with a goddess holding this original character named Morgana, and it's more like a friendly and nice picture, and I looked at it and my subconscious said, well, absolutely not. I actually waited for more than a month to make this image after first seeing the original, and I already knew that I wanted this shot with Morgana flying in the air and the face of the goddess appearing from the fog as they are staring at each other, like as if this moment was frozen in time as this colossal being is just slowly looking at the character in the foreground. Now, for those who know Boris Vallejo, this image might feel quite familiar. I could say that it is even more inspired by his works than by the original. He often made these giant creatures towering over tiny characters who were frozen in time in a really expressive pose where you can almost feel the movement of the characters. Those weirdly designed butterfly wings are also taken from many of his designs where you have this organic abstraction where something is not really designed as a believable and functional element, but it's almost just created as if it was organically grown part on the image. Also, all these really deep colors just replicate the whole feeling for me. Vallejo's pictures always seem to take place in some world with muted colors and a really hostile environment, but the characters always add a lot of color and expression and detail to the works. They are like your guides in this alien world. Actually, for this reason, nowadays I'd say that I prefer the works of Julie Bell, who had more colorful and nice looking scenes than her husband. The colors of Morgana really stood out for me with this darker, more purple look. Purple is actually my favorite color, and I went an extra mile to make her hair and her dress have all the saturated purple. It is almost the opposite of the wings actually, because those are desaturated with a lot of detail and the rest of the character has this really strong saturated purple with less detail other than the flow of the dress. I modeled the pose and the dress after underwater scenes. Her pose is really based on this slow movement when someone stays on top of the water by doing this specific leg motion. I don't know what it's actually called. And the dress is just flowing in the air like a wet cloth underwater. This entire scene is really humid. Maybe this element gives to that as well. Speaking about humid, I wanted to make the giantess slowly appear out of the fog. Yes, I said giantess. I actually titled this image The Lost Giantess of an Ancient World. I just wanted to name it a bit differently since it went rather far from the original. So what I had in mind is that this scene takes place in some deserted fantasy land where this giant creature can be found, who is possibly a marble statue that came to life. And then Morgana ventures into this land to find her, or to just find something else, and then this giant face just appears out of the fog with giant glowing eyes and light up the entire scene with a colorful crown that seem to be unaffected by the elements, and with these giant dark trails of tears all over her face, as if she's been crying out this supernatural liquid that doesn't even just feel like tears anymore. But I put an extra effort into making sure to create the atmosphere by layering all these colorful fog all over the scene and by making the eyes really feel like glowing orbs. I don't even know what the layer modes I used for all that. I just kept adding them and trying out how they look. I don't have a specific workflow for doing this as of yet. I wasn't sure about the water droplets on the screen because they tend to give off the illusion of a camera with a physical lens being present instead of a viewer who is directly observing the scene, but I decided to keep them to just further create the effect of a really humid and foggy environment. We could be smart and about it and say that these are actually droplets on the inside of your screen that gets wet just from displaying this image. For the overall effects of the fog and the glow, I will show you the original file with all the layers in a moment. Just first take a look at the final version and just try to observe how the crazy amount of aerial perspective and the fog serves the narrative in showing this really wet and foggy scene with a very low viewing distance and with the glowing eyes lighting it all up like giant spotlights. Okay, here we go. You have no idea how long I've been procrastinating on making this recording. I'm not even going to tell, I'm too embarrassed by it. Let me grab my layers and try not to dock it on the top. Okay, so what you see here is a little bit of a chaos, but what I always do with color coding is I set the outdated versions of things to gray. The blues are variations of existing things. Purples are effect layers, so these are the ones when you have to be careful when you're painting below them, or you have to turn them off because it's going to mess up everything. Look at my camera picture, what is happening? It wasn't planned. I can go back to a much earlier version of this portrait. This was like the very first try, like the first scribble, and then obviously I started refining it, and this is like almost the entire thing. There is some little fix on that crown there, there are the tears, and here's like the first really important layer, which is the fog layer. What I did for this fog layer is I obscured parts of the character with the background color, and I left the brightest parts of the face untouched by this, so it really feels like a face that is coming out from the fog, but it's really far from being done. There are just a few fixes here. This is like almost the entire face. Yes, that's literally the final version of the face. And now we can have the many layer effects that I did. Let's see, we have these bloom layers with addition layer mode. I don't think that it really affects them that they are on addition, especially when it's white. It's much more important to use addition when you're using actual colors, not just white. So there are just two layers of bloom effect, but the second one, this one is special. So what you see here is we have this transparency mask. If I turn this off, you can see that these are not made with just an airbrush. I used a modified version of this brush for these effects. I just simply set the spacing to much higher, and you can play around with the rotation, like you can turn on fuzzy depth and fuzzy stroke for your rotation, and you're pretty much going to have something like this, and you can scribble around and make these interesting shapes that don't just follow the formula of a simple airbrush. So when you actually apply the transparency mask on them, you can see that there is a little bit of a variety there, like as if you saw little beams of light that shine through the fog, and it can really convey the idea of a thick, humid environment. Thick environment? What am I even talking about? Environment filled with thick fog, that's what I wanted to say. Here we have an extra layer of these. This is just a normal layer, and this was meant to make the eyes appear much more glowy. For the shininess of this crown, we have these really gently airbrushed shapes, I just literally grabbed an airbrush and I grabbed the color from here and I scribbled over what we have already here, and I turned on color dodge. This is like a mode that really brings out different colors, but it can really mess up your image, so always use it with caution, and you can make all these really strange and nice glowing effects with it. Just for the record, printing is not really friendly with this one. Like, you can really make your prints appear strange because it always creates these really rich and saturated colors. Another color dodge layer with another one of those shapes that I made with the fancy brush. Now we have some extra fog. This is just a normal layer obscuring more of the crown and the back of this hair as well. We have some extra light. This is just an overlay layer with this bright, almost whitish blue color. This is just simply there to boost the glow and the brightness of the face. Now we have the fairy, who is really in focus, who is really clean and visible, but let's see what happens when I apply some transparency mask. We can obscure parts of the fairy as well. And now all of a sudden we see more depth in this picture. At least I feel that it adds more depth to the picture, because there is the light area that is being lit by the eyes of the giantess, but the whole body would almost be obscured by fog if these wasn't here, and it really gives you the impression that there is distance between you, the viewer, and between the fairy who is hovering in the air. Hovering? Did I just say hovering? Is that actually how you say that, hovering? I don't even care. Okay. And now we have some really afterthought effects. We have this dark fog. Now this is similar to what I did with this brush, only I use this default watercolor brush that comes with Krita. It creates these really harsh edges, like when you see watercolor that is dried around the edges, and then you can use a smudger to clean this up to make much more soft gradients, or you can also break this whole shape and create this fog effect, but you're also going to leave some of these much cleaner and much sharp parts of your brushwork, so you're going to see much more variety in your fog effect. I think I just messed up my original file. Yes, let's remember not to overwrite it. Another layer of fog. This is pretty much the same thing. I only introduced some more saturated blue color here. Another layer of the smudged watercolor strokes for the eyes. Again, I'm just repeating myself at this point. More variety and more depth for the picture. Also, you can see this little distance here, that the fairy appears really clear because she's much closer to us, but it's also being lit, and the light source itself is obscured by so much more fog that it's starting to distort, and you see much less details when you add this another layer of fog here. And I think I mentioned it in the time-lapse. I named it splatter. I should have called it water droplets or something. So there are the ones that are around the eye area, the ones that are directly lit by this color. And then we have this second layer that I made so almost invisible, as if they weren't even here. And this effect is there to further emphasize the humidity of the scene, and this way these little changes can add to the atmosphere that you want to create here. Obviously, as I said in the time-lapse, this is something that's much easier to be done in digital painting, and that's why I always say that you should actually do stuff like this with digital painting. Like, you have this new tool in order to push your effects and your entire works a little bit further. And you know, it's like something that we see really commonly today with AI art, that people kind of just try to create all these like splash art and these you know, these character portraits that are pretty like boring, despite being really detailed, and they kind of struggle to understand what is the thing that is missing from their works, because, you know, you just add more and more details, and you kind of just get stuck in thinking why is it not working as well. And it's like almost a tip for them as well to really look into it, look into photo editing, look into different programs that you can use, look into 3D, I don't know, look into whatever you have, and just put that extra effort into your work in order to push it much further. Because what I always see, I'm sorry that I started rambling about AI art, I always see that people make 1,000 pictures and they like try to push the level of detail to 10,000, and it's almost like you're seeing someone who's trying to compensate with a huge volume of work for something that they don't even really understand. They don't even really understand what could be done with it. I feel that this is what I'm doing here. Obviously it can be really overdone, it can be really overwhelming if you are like me, who doesn't really organize anything and then you just get lost in it. You can go and really push it to a next level. Like that's the whole moral of this video. I feel like I'm going to cut out a lot of things from this one. In the end, I thank you very much for watching. I was expecting to make just a simple commentary for this image, but when I checked out my file, I saw how I managed to build up the atmosphere layer by layer, and I wanted to show it all. Partially to show off, of course, but also to demonstrate how much a relatively tiny amount of post-editing can change an entire picture. As always, have a nice day, do some art, especially if it involves 200 effect layers to make it work, but most importantly, have fun while doing that. Farewell.